Today we continue reading some reflections from Dr. Mustafa Al-Badawi's penetrating diagnosis of the illnesses afflicting humanity today. And I'll be reading from Man and the Universe, an Islamic Perspective. Mustafa Al-Badawi is a consultant psychiatrist here in the UK. Here are his thoughts on science as religion, and I'll be reading from page 84 onwards. He writes, "Man cannot live without some kind of religion. Even those who hold that there is no such thing as religion merely substitute one set of beliefs for another. Religion consists in a doctrine which explains what man is, his position within the universe, and his relationship with the absolute." He spells absolute with a capital A. "It offers a law which regulates man's transactions with his environment, and beyond that it offers a method of spiritual ascent. It should always be remembered that the memory of the lost paradise lingers on within men, as does the feeling of the upward pull of the spirit. When Christianity lost its credibility and hence its powers to explain, it was simply replaced by the more materialistic alternatives on offer. Thus, instead of seeking to reach the real paradise, people busied themselves with obtaining as much pleasure from the only paradise left to them, that of immediate enjoyment in this life. And instead of striving along the path of spiritual ascent, they chose the cruder and more materialistic alternative to satisfy this need, which was to reach for the moon. The explanations of religion were replaced by scientific theories, with mere conjecture being presented as fact and held onto as tenaciously as any religious belief ever was. The most notorious example is, of course, the theory of evolution. Despite the large number of people who have attempted to demonstrate that the scientific community was equally divided between supporters and foes, popular mythology accepts it as a proven fact, and scientists from other disciplines readily use the concept as categorically as they use directly observable data. Belief in science is currently perceived as conferring the right to be sceptical of everything, including science, and as release from the obligation to strive for the truth. Dr. Albert Ellis, an American psychologist who originated a reasonably successful form of psychotherapy that he labelled rational emotive therapy, writes, and he quotes, "The idea that certain people are bad or wicked springs from the ancient theological doctrine of free will, which assumes that every person has the freedom to act rightly or wrongly in relation to some absolute standard of truth and justice ordained by God or the natural law, and that if anyone uses his free will to behave wrongly, he is a wicked sinner. This doctrine has no scientific foundation because its key terms, including absolute truth, God, free will, and natural law, are purely definitional and can be neither proven nor disproven in empirical scientific terms." End quote. This kind of argument is fairly widespread in the West and reveals the contradictions inherent in such pseudo-objectivity. Denying the absolute must surely also mean denying oneself the right to speak in such absolute terms. To think of proof as only possible in purely scientific terms is to attribute to science a competence far exceeding its quite limited territory. It is to be so hypnotised by science that sight is lost of the fact that it is valid only in what pertains to the material level, and that also in a very relative way. It would have been more rational to think that proof should be adequate to the level of what needs to be proved. Intelligible things require intelligible proof, and spiritual things require spiritual truth. The fact that the West has lost the ability to accept spiritual proof neither renders the spiritual dimension non-existent, nor does it affect the validity of such proof at its own level. That they cannot prove God scientifically merely proves that he is not material enough to be measured. To conclude that he therefore does not exist is patently absurd. Now, what if he did? What if those millions of people who have lived throughout the centuries believing in a life to come were not so naive and backward after all? What of the inertia and complacency of those who do not even wish to find out? Pleasure-seeking and the wish to achieve are basic human traits. However, the West has substituted immediate and lowly pleasures for those of paradise and the spirit, and achievement in terms of income and social status for spiritual growth. There are a few people in the West who are aware that theirs is indeed a precarious situation and who have some degree of sincerity in wishing to find a way out. They will first of all have to disentangle themselves from the current myths which shape their mentality, and they will then be faced with a myriad of pseudo-religions which abound in the West today, and nowhere more so than in America. Some of those are parodies of true traditions, others are invented from moment to moment as the situation requires, and there are even some which are based on science fiction. Very few indeed are those who are able to see through such mirages and keep their feet firmly on the ground. Until next time.